The 144,000 on Mount Zion, an angel proclaiming the eternal good news to the inhabitants of the earth. These are just two of the images that we find in Revelation 14 and that we want to consider this week on Fridays with Phil. I'm Dr. Phil Mayo, and I'd like to share with you a few minutes of biblical insight that will help you along the way. If you enjoy the content, please be sure to subscribe. This week we want to take a look at Revelation chapter 14, verses 1 through 13. This section is an interesting one in that it begins with the description of the 144,000 and ends with a call to perseverance and a blessing on these same individuals. This section, verses 1 through 13, is really a response to what we saw last week in chapter 13 and those who follow the beast. In between the description of the 144,000 and the blessing that ends this section is the proclamation of three angels. And each of those proclamations are really proclamations of judgment. Let's take a look at it now and see what's going on in chapter 14. In chapter 14, verse 1, John writes, "Then I looked, and behold, the Lamb was standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads." Just a few observations about this verse. One, this is the first time we've seen the 144,000 since chapter 7, where we saw that militaristic style census of 12,000 from the 12 tribes of Israel, and then a second scene where we saw an innumerable multitude from all the nations standing before the throne who had come out of the great persecution. Here in chapter 14, we find out what that seal is, and that it is the name of God and the Lamb placed on their forehead. This is a sign of belonging, that they belong to God. In verse 4, John writes, "These are the ones, the 144,000, who have not been defiled with women, for they have kept themselves chaste. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been purchased from among men as first fruits to God and the Lamb, and no lie was found in their mouth. They are blameless." Now, a few observations about this description of the 144,000. It's important to recognize that this description is very symbolic. It's very metaphorical. First of all, they haven't defiled themselves with women. We identified the 144,000 in chapter 7 as the universal people of God. Well, we know that the people of God from all the nations of the earth are not just men. It's made up of both men and women. But the idea here is sexual purity. Notice they haven't defiled themselves with women. They keep themselves chaste. The point here is that they're pure. In the Old Testament, we see this actually in 1 Samuel with David, who says that his men, when they go out to battle, keep themselves from women. This is because they want God to go with them, and they want to have success and victory because of the presence of God. This is about purity. We'll find out later in this section of Revelation 14 that those inhabitants of the earth who follow the beast defile themselves and drink the wine of her adulteries. So you see the contrast between sexual purity and sexual immorality. This is a contrast that is found other places in the book of Revelation. And even in the Old Testament, often Israel's idolatry was likened to sexual immorality. So this is all really a metaphor for being pure or being impure. Another characteristic of the 144,000 is that they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. It's total devotion. Just like we learned about those who accept the mark of the beast in chapter 13, they worship the beast and they follow him and they look to him for everything. These have been purchased from among men as first fruits to God and the Lamb, and no lie is found in their mouth. They are blameless. So what do you see here? You see a purity, blamelessness, and truth. These are all characteristics of the Lamb in the book of Revelation. He is blameless, pure, and he speaks the truth. In fact, it's the truth that he uses to overcome his enemies. So I mentioned a moment ago that this section begins with a description of the 144,000 and ends with a blessing. on these same individuals or a blessing on the people of God. In between are three angels who make three proclamations. The first angel in verse 6 says, John writes, "And I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven, having an eternal gospel to preach to those who live on the earth, and to every nation and tribe and tongue and people." Now we've heard this description before, every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. In chapter 5, we heard it in chapter 7, we heard it again in chapter 13. This is a proclamation of the gospel that's being made. Well, you wonder about that because, of course, we know that it's the people of God's responsibility to proclaim the gospel. What's going on here, however, is actually judgment. Notice what the angel says in the very next verse. "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and springs of waters." In chapter 13, we saw that those who receive the mark of the beast worship the beast and follow him. So the call here is to worship God. And really, the good news or the gospel, in fact, this is the only place in the book of Revelation that the word gospel or good news appears, is a twofold message. It's a message of salvation to those who choose to accept it, and it's a message of judgment to those who do not. And we have learned in Revelation that the inhabitants of the earth have refused to repent and to accept the message of God. Then John sees a second angel who says, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who has made all the nations drink of the wine of the passion of her immorality." Again, you hear that distinction between sexual purity of the 144,000 and the sexual immorality of those who follow the beast. This cry of "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great" is found in Isaiah, actually, but it's also found later in Revelation 18:2. The fall of Babylon, the destruction of Babylon, and the judgment of God on Babylon is portrayed in more detail in the following chapters. Why the metaphor or the image of Babylon is being used, we'll talk about later when we get to those sections. Finally, the third angel proclaims, "If anyone worships the beast in his image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is mixed in full strength in the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb." So here you see what the end judgment will be on those who have received the mark of the beast and worship the beast. This description, this judgment on them, is in contrast to the description we see of the 144,000 in the first verses. It's also set in contrast to the next two verses that talk about the blessing on the people of God. In verse 12, John writes, "Here is the perseverance of the saints who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus." Again, this call for perseverance that we saw in Revelation 13, we see it again here. And John writes, "And I heard a voice from heaven saying, 'Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, so that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow with them.'" And so in this passage, you see here a contrast. You see in these last few verses, the reward of those who follow the beast is eternal torment before the Lamb, and the reward of those who die in the Lord. Now, this idea probably is not just about dying a natural death, but it's about dying a death of martyrdom, because that figures prominently in the book of Revelation. As John says in Revelation 12, the saints, the holy ones of God, overcome Satan by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives even unto death. So we see here in the book of Revelation a dichotomy between those who follow the Lamb and those who follow the beast, and what the end result of their choices will be. Next week, we'll continue our study of the book of Revelation. Won't you join me? Thank you, and God bless you.